I will call this meeting to order. Good evening, everybody. I know there are a few folks still outside, but we get them in as they arrive. My name is Marianne Veneers. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for International Trade and Transportation, and I'm also the Deputy Director of the MedTrans Transportation Center. And I'm here to welcome you to Cal State Long Beach, to our beautiful Carpenter Performing Arts Center, and I'm welcoming you to the 10th Town Hall meeting, the 10th CITT Town Hall meeting. As I mentioned, I suspect there may be some people in the lobby, some may even watch on the screen outside, but I'm delighted to see the turnout tonight. And yes, Rick Steins did a fantastic job promoting the event down at the docks, and I very much appreciate he doing this. It's also a pleasure to see so many friends in the audience. I do wish I had time to recognize you all by name. But I don't. I do, however, want to recognize our GLS students, our MHEL students, and our CSULB students, all students in the room. We have some folks from USC as well. Please stand up and be recognized. There we go. And then there's another group of people that, in my opinion, definitely deserve some special recognition. And those are, I believe, 43 people who came up all the way from San Diego under leadership of the dynamic Bella Hoyle, who is the president of the World Trade Center Association in San Diego. Welcome and thank you for coming. As you know, this is the 10th town hall, and I have to admit the curiosity has gotten the better of me. So I wonder if you could indulge me in a little informal survey. I want to know who was at the first annual town hall meeting in 1999. Can I see a show of hands? Quite a few people. How many were here at least 5 town hall meetings? Quite a lot of people. How many of you were here in all 10 town hall meetings? Oh my God, quite a few. All those who were here in 10 town hall meetings, I want you to come forward after the event. I want to shake your hands and I want to have a photo with you, all right? Please come on down. On the back of your program, hold on, let me get my order here. On the back of your program, actually in your program on page 7, you find the names of the Policy and Steering Committee. And those men and women put a lot of effort in figuring out the town hall topic every year. And I would like you to meet the chair of the committee and my boss, Dr. Chi Choshi, Dean of University College and Extension Services. Dean, please stand up to be recognized. There. Well, and I do have to introduce my former boss, the former Dean of University College and Extension Services, who serves now as the interim Dean of the interim, forgive me, Marilyn, I'm getting there, who currently serves as the interim State University Dean, Extended and Continuing Education, Dr. Marilyn Crago. Thank you for coming. And now, since we're warming up, I would like the Policy and Steering Committee to stand up to be recognized. Stand up, please. There we go. As I mentioned earlier, this committee takes a thorough assessment of the state of transportation in determining the themes of our town hall meeting. Now, this year, it didn't take them very long to figure out the topic. We decided to look at the decade ahead, only fitting as tonight, with the 10th town hall, we conclude a decade of town halls, right? So in the decade ahead, we want to know Where's the cargo? Where will the cargo be? What and where is the competition? What will the job market look like? And what can you do about it? These are difficult times. You've heard it the whole year through. And all you have to do, in essence, is open up the newspaper these days and read the depressing stories. Let me just give you a few headlines that were in a recent Journal of Commerce in the Newswire, and it said in there, retail container traffic sinks, rail traffic plunges, jobless rate jumps, US air cargo collapses in January. Well, do I need to go on? Not really. Perhaps, maybe with one economy notice that was sent to me by a friend, Sue Bailey. She is actually here tonight. And it reads like this. Due to the recent budget cuts in the cost of electricity, gas and oil, as well as the current market condition and the continued decline of the US economy, the light at the end of the tunnel has been turned off. We apologize for the inconvenience. Well, all I can say is this. A crisis is a terrible thing to waste, so let's go to work. We have an exciting agenda for you tonight. We structured a program so that we allow for questions from the audience, and this is only during the panel presentation. With this, we are going to keep the introduction of our speakers short. Go to your program, read up on the impressive background of our panelists and our speakers. And at this time, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you to the president of the California State University, Long Beach, Dr. F. King Alexander.
Thank you, Marianne. Welcome back to campus. I noticed that the program must be a little bit better than last year. There are a lot more people inside than waiting outside and hanging around outside. That seems to have been the pattern for the last couple of years. As one of the two largest industries in Long Beach, the port and this university, as I tell people, that we've got a lot in common in many ways, but the thing we have in common the most in the LA port and Long Beach port is that good or bad economy, we're not going anywhere. The port's going to be here and the university's going to be here. So it's imperative that we work together in these good and bad economic times. It's imperative as a university that we're a forum for you to come and resolve issues, to work together, because we're all in this together. We share the same concepts and we want to have the same quality of lives that many other nations and many other cities enjoy around the world. So once again, thank you on behalf of our faculty, on behalf of our Center for International Trade and Transportation, and on behalf of our 38,000 students and our faculty and staff. We're honored that you're back on campus and we're able to celebrate this 10th anniversary with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Alexander. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to take a few moments to introduce some very special guests and dignitaries here in the audience. And what I'm asking you to do is please hold your applause until I read all the names that I have here. And then afterwards, we applaud everyone collectively. So here with us is Commissioner Mario Cordero, and let me say this is in no particular order, this is how they came in, all right? We have Commissioner Mario Cordero with the Port of Long Beach. We have Commissioner Nick Schrammek from the Port of Long Beach. John Hummer, Deputy Secretary, State Department of Business, Transportation and Housing. Bill Grady is here with the Office of Congresswoman Linda Sanchez. Helen Ansel with the Office of State Senator Alan Lowenthal. Nikki Tennant with the Office of Assemblyman Bunny Lowenthal. Tanya Reyes-Oranga, the City Council member for District 7. We have Joe Cordes, President of Local 13, ILWU. Rich Dines, as I mentioned earlier, President of the Southern California District Council with the ILWU. Captain Paul Wiedenhöft, Captain of the Port with the United States Coast Guard. Here is also Dick Steinkip, Executive Director of the Port of Long Beach, and Connie Siebel with the Office of Supervisor Don Canabi. I also received a few cards here, so let me go through those. Megan McLaughlin is here with the Office of Assemblyman Anthony Adams. Brian Min Geni is here with the Office of Assemblymember Warren Fuotani. Bill Horton is here with State Senator Robert Wright, and Tim Lee with Congresswoman Laura Richardson. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to the special guests. An event like this is only possible because of the generous support of our sponsors. So please take a moment in our brochure and where we have the sponsors listed, and we see a little bit more later on those organizations that help us support, together with the Metrans Transportation Center, this event. And it's their contribution, it's the funding from the Department of Transportation, U.S. Department of Transportation, and Caltrans that allows us to offer this event for free to all of you here, and free parking, I should add. Now, before we get started, I want to bring to you only two things to your attention. First, tonight's proceedings will be webcast, and the webcast will be archived on our website. So in your program, on page 1 on the bottom, you will find the website, and this webcast is available to be viewed and downloaded after March 19th. I think that is correct. The second item that I want to bring to your attention is that in your program you find a yellow form, and this is a feedback and evaluation form. We need you to fill this out. It is very important for us to learn more, hear from you what you think about this event, and answer those questions. Please note also that if you fill out this form and turn it in return, you get one of our new t-shirts. Commemorative t-shirts of the town hall meetings. Or let me phrase it otherwise. You only get a t-shirt if you turn in a filled out form to the ushers outside. Let me quickly see. I believe this is most what I have for now, and with this, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you to Dr. Genevieve Giuliano, Senior Associate Dean of Research and Technology, School of Policy Planning and Development at USC, and also the Director of the Metrans Transportation Center. Jen?
Hi, everybody. I think I have to do that. Marianne's taller than I am, as is most other people. Hi, and welcome to our 10th and final town hall in this format. As you know, I'm Jen Giuliano. I'm the director of the Metrans Transportation Center, and that's the center that's really proud to be part of this wonderful event. I'm delighted to see such a great crowd and to see attendees not only from the ILWU, but from the ports, terminal management, international trade businesses, elected officials, and members of the public. Tonight, for us, is bittersweet. We have a lot to celebrate, but also some reasons to be sad. As for celebration, we have a really long list. We've had 10 years of a truly unique outreach event. We've had 10 years of providing a neutral forum to educate and inform everyone involved in the ports and international trade. We've had 10 years of financial contributions from many local agencies and organizations to help support the town hall, especially our longtime sponsors, the ports of LA and Long Beach, and the ILWU. And last but not least, we celebrate CITT, which has become a respected voice in the international trade community and the go-to place for information and training. Now I want to say a few words about why this evening for us is bittersweet. Tonight, the podium will be missing one of the most important voices of the town hall, Richard Hollingsworth. As many of you know, Richard passed away in August after a valiant fight against cancer. Any of you who have attended previous town halls know that you will know Richard as the tough, effective, but ultimately charming panel moderator. In his Irish accent, which he never lost despite decades of living in California, He was the master of enforcing the town hall rules. You may ask questions only on tonight's topic. No comments or speeches are permitted. And most importantly, we respect all persons, all opinions, all of the time. As you will see in our program, Richard was one of the town hall's creators. He was one of the few who did not think it was crazy to bring the university to the docks, as Dominic Moretti would say. We miss Richard greatly, but his legacy lives on in the many educational activities of Metrans and CITT, and through the scholarship fund established in his honor. We are pleased to announce that the fund has met the level to qualify as a university endowment, thanks to the many contributions from friends, colleagues, and businesses. Thank you. Many of the contributors are in the room. We encourage you to contribute whatever you can, and the information is in tonight's program. Our second sense of bittersweet tonight comes from this being our last town hall, at least as we've done it for 10 years. I'm sure you agree that it has been a great event, and I encourage you to read the history of the town hall that we've included tonight in the program. You might be asking, why end the town hall? And what are you going to do instead? Well, I can answer the why question. The answer is, we've accomplished the goals that we set out for this event. Labor, ports, terminal operators, and others in the international trade supply chain have been brought together at least once a year for 3 hours on a weekday evening. The idea of a neutral forum where controversial issues can be discussed and where we all learn something in the process has proven itself. The value of the university, the knowledge and research produced in informing the public discussion has been demonstrated. So those goals have been accomplished. Now for the question, what's next? That's a really good question. We will have some form of town hall event, probably in a smaller venue and probably oriented to a broader audience. We welcome your suggestions. In fact, we really, really want your suggestions, so please complete your survey tonight. Write on the back page if you run out of space on the front page. And remember, that's the price of your t-shirt tonight. As we bring this town hall tradition to an end, it's essential that we recognize Dominic Moretti for his heroic efforts in making the town hall a success. Were it not for Dominic, I cannot imagine that we would even have held the first town hall, and I'm certain we never would have had 10. Please join me in recognizing Dominic. Thank you. And now let's get on with the program. I'm pleased to introduce to you Paul Bingham, who will get us started with an overview of the international trade picture. Paul is currently Managing Director at Global Insight. I think he may know more about global trade than anyone, and I'm sure you'll enjoy his presentation. His bio is in the program, so I won't take the time now to relate all of his many accomplishments. In the interest of time, after Paul's presentation, we will move directly to tonight's video, which is going to bring the global trade story closer to home and tell how our local trade is being affected by these global trends. And at the end of the video, Joe Magadino, tonight's panel moderator, and the panel members will take the stage, and the panel discussion will begin. Thanks so much. Enjoy the program, and may I introduce Paul Bingham. Thank you.
Thank you to Professor Giuliano for that great short introduction. Also, thank all of you for coming tonight to this last town hall. I'm actually privileged to be participating for the first time, and I'm really sorry I've missed all the previous ones. And I want to thank CITT and Metrans and the university for having me here today. My task is that, though, of the bearer of some bad news, and I hope you don't want to shoot the messenger when I'm done. I've got a few slides that I'm going to use to depict the story I'm going to tell you, and it's one of the outlook for the economy. A couple of years ago, I gave a talk like this to a general audience. People perhaps didn't know a lot of the details, and in this case, I'm really handicapped in a sense because you all know a whole lot about this yourselves personally every day, and in fact, you're living it not just in the business press and what we see in the industry, but even in the broad general media. Even the local news covers this almost every day. So really, what's this all about today? Why am I here? Well, fundamentally for the community here, it's what's going on at the ports. San Pedro Bay has really been hit by this downturn, the recession. And if I graph the port's import TEU volume, so this is looking at import container trade, sort of the big top line number that has gotten the most attention over the last decade or so through the ports. I've overlaid here the past 3 years plus our company's forecast through July of 2009 onto one graph where the axis is the seasonal patterns through the months of each of the years. So it's January through December. So we're looking at the same pattern of time across each of the years, and it's the number of TEUs. And unfortunately, the story here is one that you're all painfully aware of, where the peak year in this time frame was actually 2006. We started to see the downturn in 2007 with that gray line, and then 2008 continued this trend of further reductions in the month-to-month volumes. We still saw the seasonal pattern where we have the slow period in the winter and the peak and later in the second half of the year. But each year we've seen these successive declines in absolute volumes and the jobs associated with those, the revenue to the companies. All of that has been part of this story. And unfortunately, I don't have the good news story to say that it's coming out in the time frame that we've got just up here for this year, but I'm going to come back to this, so don't despair. And the reason for this, the answer to the question, you know the answer, it's up at the top. It is the economy. It's fundamentally what's happened first in the U.S. with the subprime real estate market, and then more broadly into the U.S. Credit markets, the financial markets, housing markets, autos industry, and on and on and on through now the entire world in recession. But what does this mean for the ports? Well, ultimately, why does port activity occur? Well, it's the underlying demand for goods. I like to tell people that freight transportation, cargo moves, is purely derived demand. There's no leisure freight travel. People only pay to have something shipped because they want the goods somewhere where it's not. And fundamentally, that means that for trade, fundamentally, trade demand is what is underlying the port business. Everything else affects it at the margins, but ultimately you have to have the consumers and the businesses want to buy something that crosses a border to have that demand, to have the activity show up and actually want somebody at the ports to do something with it. And that has some consequences. That means no financial incentives or performance improvements in terms of productivity can induce trade in and of itself. If nobody's buying the products, you're not going to have any of that cargo move no matter how you want to price it, and shippers can move things elsewhere. And I do want to acknowledge that they can affect the shares of remaining trade between ports. Competitiveness matters, and there are optional gateways for discretionary cargo. But fundamentally, that demand for the goods has to be there for us to see the activity through the ports. Now, there's a lot of factors that are affecting that in terms of what we've seen in the past decade and what we see going forwards. One of those has been the advantages of having globalization proceed over the last, actually really 50 years, if we really want to look back far enough, with integrated supply chains offering economies of scale in production, lower costs of production, which have allowed consumers to buy goods at lower prices. Globalization has also opened markets to our exporters. We are actually a very successful exporting nation, as you know, through the huge cargo volumes that go on export. And that's made possible by having some of those same barriers to trade reduced in our trade partner economies so that we can export goods. That is good news in good times. In bad times, that actually presents a problem because now these economies are more and more linked inherently because the goods we're buying are made somewhere else overseas and our customers are overseas. It's not something we can control within our own political and economic system by itself. And we've seen that in this downturn, globalization of markets is not reversed. There's some impediments to trade that weren't there before, but fundamentally the links now are too comprehensive in terms of the interdependencies around the world. And we can see this in terms of some very simple measures. One way to look at this is let's look at the total value of the world economy. Everything that's produced, goods and services around the entire world, if we add everything up that we can add together. And then let's compare that to the value of trade. And one way to do that is to look at imports And I've graphed here looking all the way back to 1980 and looking forwards out to 2035. The history of this. This is a representation of the growth of the importance of trade to the world economy. This is no surprise to any of you. We've lived through this here in San Pedro Bay with the increasing volume of port activity. Growth in trade that has exceeded the growth of the underlying economy, reflecting every year a greater percentage of the activity in the economy tied to international trade. However, we've got a recession, and this recession is severe enough that it has both lowered commodity prices for things like crude oil and grains and steel. So in value terms, some of the value of those goods that are moving, even if the volumes were same, if we look at it in dollar terms, has been reduced. And also there's reduced demand. The composition of the economy of the world is actually shifting away from just goods consumption right now in this recession. And we see an offset of that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the government side of the economy, which isn't usually reflected in goods demand. So that means actually we're seeing a downturn in this share of world trade right now in the recession compared to the value of the economy. But the good news, and I'm going to continue on with this theme in a couple of other points in this presentation, the good news is this is not the end in terms of this recession of growth that we expect to see in the world. There is a business cycle. It's not been repealed when we had bubbles, and when they burst, as we've had now in this recession, that doesn't repeal the business cycle. The demand of economies, the growth in populations, the desire for success amongst families and businesses will all drive us back eventually to growth again, and we return to that growth path so that once again we'll see the growth in trade, albeit at a slightly slower pace than we saw in the last couple of years, so that trade comes back, and that provides some of the problems we'll talk about later as well. But let me step back quickly and let's talk about some more characteristics of the world economy. And what we are in our company now calling, this is a creation of our macroeconomists, they're now calling this the Great Recession. This is echoing the phrase applied to the Depression in the 1930s, which was called the Great Depression. I'll draw a distinction in those two. Right now, North America, the countries in Europe and Japan are all in a severe downturn, unprecedented in any of our professional careers. Growth in the emerging economies that have been at a blistering pace for most of this decade is now slowing sharply, especially in countries like China, who are so important to us as trade partners. And we've seen impacts of the financial crisis separate from the underlying reduction in demand provide some impediments to trade, most immediately in terms of what's happened in the recent past here. In the fourth quarter of last year, the collapse of the U.S. export mini-boom that we saw going on early in 2008. However, to keep this from being all doom and gloom, we are not forecasting that we repeat the Great Depression. We are not going to have 25% unemployment in this country. We're not going to have the same lengths of soup kitchen lines and massive disruption of the economy. There are enough safeguards and there's enough interdependency in the world economy actually to shelter us from that. And we also have some confidence that actually the policymakers won't fall to the temptation to some of the same mistakes that were made in the Great Depression, which made that worse than it needed to be just from the downturn in the economy. We believe that the fiscal and monetary stimulation that the federal government is taking on in massive scale right now with the Obama administration and Congress is going to have an impact. Some of it takes a while. That when you engage in monetary stimulus by lowering interest rates, it takes a while for lending to start up and to start working its way through the economy. So we don't see all the impacts immediately in terms of people going back to work and businesses actually able to get loans and grow again, but it will happen. So our baseline forecast for the economy is that we are going to be in this very deep recession, unprecedented this year, but we'll start to see modest recovery next year, and that we'll be in a broader rebound in the United States and globally in 2011. Now, I've mapped here this business cycle not being dead. I want to show you a little bit of what we predict in terms of this path for the world economy. This is, again, that measure that I've used of the total world economy as gross domestic product, we call it as economists, in the blue bars on this chart. And against that, I've measured in the red line an indication of industrial activity called industrial production. And you'll see how volatile that's been. Looking back over a couple of decades back to 1980, we've been in a recession before in the world, and we use a rule of thumb of a 2% as the threshold. If we're above growth of 2% in the world economy, we're not in recession. If it's below that, we are. And I've highlighted in red here a couple of the bars when we've had previous recessions in this time period. We had a very sharp recession in the early 1980s, but we still managed to see some world growth just marginally. We had a recession in the early 1990s, and then we had the 2001 recession, recession, which was actually from world standards, at least until this recession, we thought was very sharp and very severe. And in each case, you'll see that that red line also fell. In fact, fell very sharply with a reduction in output. And the measure of this recession, this Great Recession, is the depth of these lines. Unprecedented to have a 2% contraction in the world economy. People losing their jobs in all countries of the world. Companies shutting down, businesses collapsing or at least seeing sharp reductions in sales, very sharp reductions in investment, business activity, and consumers and households suffering everywhere, not just in the United States. But the good news is that the recovery does happen. And in fact, the recovery will be led in the United States so that we start to see this uptick, maybe close to being out of recession, but not quite, even at a global level by next year. And industrial production starts to creep back up. But we're not forecasting that we're going to get back to the boom days of the bubbles of either this past early stages of this decade or the last one. We're forecasting that growth is more moderate. And this includes growth in some faster emerging economies like China. Now, let me give you a little bit of a geographic flavor of how this breaks out across the world. I've grouped all the countries of the world into 8 regions here. We have North America, the Western Europe, and Japan, sort of our traditional developed economy trade partners on the left. And then on the right, I've grouped together the rest of the world into other Americas, emerging Europe, the Middle East and Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and other Asia Pacific, which includes China. And for each of those regions, I've put together here in the graphs of the bars, it's a representation of the growth in the economies of each of these over 4 years. Looking back to 2007, and then last year, 2008 in the red, and then this year in yellow, the 2009 number, and then looking forward just 1 year from our company's perspective, what we expect to see in terms of recovery. And you'll note that the recession in terms of an actual shrinking economy only affects the developed world. We actually only see contraction in North America and Europe and Japan. Now that's in a tremendous proportion of the total world economy in terms of the value of output, but it also gives you some idea that the other economies in the world, though they're suffering tremendously with a tremendous slowdown in terms of growth, they're still growing. They're actually producing more and the value of their output is actually greater this year, even this year, than last year. And when they start to recover, they get back perhaps not to the growth rates we saw in 2007, but still very strong growth. Some of the export demand that we expect to see for the United States is in those countries. And similarly, as producers supplying the U.S., as we get into recovery, some of those countries also benefit. Well, let's turn and now just look specifically at the United States. This Great Recession will be long and deep, the worst economy since the Great Depression of the 30s. So by historical perspectives, we start to get into an area of economists where we don't actually have a good blueprint and model for this happening before, or at least not to the degree that we've seen now. That makes forecasting off of historical patterns very difficult, but we've still nevertheless fearlessly forged ahead and gone and done this anyway. And unfortunately, that leads us to some rather pessimistic conclusions about the severity of this recession. And for this audience, I think it's very important to realize the metric of this, over 7 million jobs lost, is really horrendous. This is a level of unemployment approaching 10%, which by no means is comparable to the Great Depression, but in anything in our lifetimes, this is actually going to be the worst in terms of jobs lost. Everybody in this room knows somebody that will be losing their job or already has lost their job, or at least has lost hours in terms of how much they're getting at work. And it's not going to get better right away, unfortunately. This global financial crisis that really stopped what remaining trade growth there was in 2008 has not fully played out yet. And in fact, this quarter, the first quarter of 2009, is actually forecast now by our company to be the worst part of the recession. So what we saw even at the end of last year wasn't the worst of it. We're still in it. And unfortunately, as far as the sectors of the economy, every part of the economy that we can measure, whether it's households, the consumers, the businesses, even state and local governments, have all cut back. And they've had to because they've either lost their jobs or their credit's been reduced, or in the governmental case, we've seen tax revenues reduced as income and profits have been drawn down. And really the only sector that remains then is the federal government, who can actually borrow against the wealth of the country for the long term and to actually start spending to bring stimulus back, to get consumption started and to start job growth again. And in fact, that's what Congress is doing. That's what the administration is doing. That's what economists recommend. And in fact, that will be the answer to get us out of this. And not just in the United States, but federal governments around the world. So China has their own stimulus program, for example, to try to help support the growth in demand in their economy. I have a particular comment, though, about the shape of the fiscal stimulus bill that came out that I'm sure will be addressed by some of the later speakers and maybe even in some of your comments. At the end of last year, we heard a lot of talk about this stimulus bill really being focused on transportation infrastructure, the obvious highway bill kinds of spending on bridges and on roadways and on access to ports and on railways. Well, I think we as economists were disappointed, especially from the trade side, that less of the stimulus bill actually ended up being devoted to that. And really what that's left us with is an infrastructure capacity that'll be inadequate after all this fiscal stimulus bill spending has played out. And we're still looking to Congress to come up with adequate funding that we really need as a nation in our infrastructure. And luckily, there's an opportunity for that in the federal highway bill reauthorization that hasn't happened yet. But let me get back to talking about the outlook here. If I look in a little more detail at the U.S. economy, here measuring again this GDP measure, the gross domestic product, quarter by quarter now, looking just back to the 2001 recession on the left, you can see that the blue bars that fall below the line of the 0% starting actually in late 2008 haven't played out yet. And the good news is, quarter by quarter, we start to see the uptick by the end of this year. By Christmas time, by the fall holidays, we expect to see the economy starting to tick upwards. It's from a very low base, since we've had several quarters now of actual negative growth. But the bad news from a job perspective is jobs fall late and then they recover late. So we're not actually going to see the peak unemployment until next year. And then it only starts to come down gradually as we get really almost towards 2011 that we start to see the decline in unemployment. And unemployment there is mapped in the red line. And that's the measure where the higher number on the right scale is actually the negative. That's more people losing their jobs. And we don't start to see recovery really in that until that 2011 period, and then it plays out as we go forwards off the map. But we're going to have some hurt for a long time in terms of employment. Now, turning to trade, if we look at imports and exports, they've really collapsed since last year. We'd started to see the downturn in imports, even across the docks, as we'd said in 2007. But I want to compare that to the top line in terms of our company's forecast of the economy in the U.S. as a whole. For the year, for 2009, we're forecasting the economy is going to shrink by 3.7%. That may not sound like a lot in percentage terms, but it's, as I mentioned, an awful lot of jobs, and that's a severe reduction when you typically have trend growth, even just from population and workforce expansion in this country of about 2%. So that's quite a contraction. And even in the recovery in 2010, we don't get back even to 2% growth, still 1.4. I've included the federal government as a line item here because it's really the only sector I could find that stays positive. It's the only sector where we have, even in 2009, growth in spending, and that's reflective of what we see in what Congress is doing to actually spend money. Now, turning to trade for the rest of my presentation, we saw this boom in exports last year such that for the year as a whole, we ended up with quite positive, this 6.5% growth in exports. But as we know, the run rate, when we ended the year, exports were actually in free fall. And unfortunately, we're forecasting that continues on into this year as our trade partner economies stay weak and they don't have the demand for the products that we want to sell them. So we're forecasting exports to fall 14.7% this year. That's really catastrophic in terms of the volumes for our exporters and the jobs that will be lost related to that. And unfortunately, because the recovery starts here and picks up overseas, we're still forecasting a decline in exports in 2010. Now, imports start to pick up this year, but first they're going to fall 13.8%, and that is a tremendous fall off in volume. We're going to see more falls off in the port volumes as we go forwards. And even in recovery in 2010, that's still rather weak growth by some of the boom years that we saw coming out of the last recession in 2010. Now, I want to touch on one of the major factors that affects trade, and we hear a lot about this sometimes in terms of the competitiveness of the U.S. as a trading nation against our trade partner economies. And here I've mapped the U.S. dollar exchange rate against a basket of our major trading partner countries and other important trading partners. But the long-term story here, going all the way back to the 70s, is you can see the trend really since about 2000, and even going back before that into the 80s, is a long-term decline in the value of the dollar. And this is, understand what that means. It means that we as importers that want to buy goods made overseas, we face higher import prices when they translate from those foreign currencies in the economies where they're made into dollar terms. The flip side of that is for our exporters, it helps them because when they're producing goods in dollars, they actually can sell cheaper in those foreign currencies in those foreign countries, which over time helps resolve the big trade imbalance that we've had for years and years. And in fact, that's what's driving this. Internationally, the pressure on the dollar comes from the huge trade imbalance that we've had with the U.S. borrowing money essentially to consume more than or to import more than we export, and that moderates over time. But what I want to call attention to here on the lower right is that little uptick in both of these lines. We saw with the financial crisis, there was a flight of really out of fear into the US dollar versus some of the trade partner country currencies. So the dollar actually appreciated. It rose against our trade partner economies' currencies, making our exporters temporarily less competitive right at the time demand was falling, and similarly boosting the ability of the US consumers to buy imports. So this actually is a little bit of an offset to the bad news story. But as this plays out, relatively quickly, we fall back into the long-term trend of the dollar declining. So finally, let's turn to actually the outlook for trade. And I'll start at the biggest picture here for maritime trade. World seaborne trade tonnage. So this is everything moving on the oceans and international trade between any country. And you can see how in tonnage terms, this was actually very strong growth for most of this decade that's just started to fall off in the last couple of years. And growth of 4% tonnage terms is still tremendous growth. That's still faster than the world economy, but we're in this year of global recession, and absolute trade tonnage is going to fall. This is the big headline story for the shipping industry on both the liner shipping and bulk shipping, where they have less cargo to haul this year than last year, and they've still got ships coming out of shipyards in Asia. So this is a real problem for rate structure for those carriers, and that has implications that flow back through terminal operators and everybody else in the supply chain globally, because that's the big picture. The good news is, though, that we do get to recovery. It's not a torrid recovery of very rapid growth, but we do get back to growth in 2010. So this is a temporary phenomenon that we have to endure, and it will have consequences at a company level, but at a global level and industry level, there is light at the end of that tunnel. It actually has not gone out. Turning a little bit more closely to home in terms of what we really pay attention to a lot in San Pedro Bay is container trade. And if we look at container trade volume, actually some of those growth rates were higher in parts of the last decade, but we've seen the fall off actually start earlier in this, reflecting the mix of goods consumed, and we are also forecasting an absolute decline in container volumes globally in 2009, meaning there'll be a lot of ships in layup and a lot of port terminal capacity that isn't going to be used, a lot of longshore capacity in the workforce that won't be put to work because we don't have the demand for the boxes. But the recovery's coming, and if we hang on as an industry, there will be job growth again. And specifically, finally, if we look just at U.S. trades, here I've picked out the import side of the major east-west trades, the trade with Asia in the red line, and trade with, I put together Europe and the Mediterranean in the dotted black line. You'll see that we started to see this decline back even before 2007 in terms of growth rates, and we fall here by double digits. This is the really sad story of the import growth being less than shrinking more than 10% this year, as I had alluded to earlier in that value of U.S. trade. But the recovery will happen. We will get back to growth we're forecasting around 5% depending upon the trade lane next year, off of a lower base. So we're not going to be employing the same number of workers we needed to handle that cargo as in 2006. This is growth rates, not the levels. But still, recovery is coming, and it will be sustained. It will not fall back into a double-dip recession or something quickly. And we're forecasting that it'll be at more moderate growth levels than we saw before, but that's still healthy growth of around 5%. It's still growth faster than the economy as a whole, and on a long-term basis, that still gets us into a position where we have some other problems, which we're going to talk about. But I want to touch on one more thing in terms of the trade patterns we see. Chinese export growth has slowed with the U.S. more than with the other economies. Here I've mapped, looking back over the past decade, China's exports to the U.S. in the right is in this blue line, with Europe in the red and Asia in the gold, with the total in green. And if you look at coming out of the 2001 recession there, the U.S. trade grew the fastest. This is after China ceded to the World Trade Organization, and we had very rapid opening of their markets. And the U.S. by far was both the most important trade partner across the oceans for China and also the fastest growing. But that wasn't sustained, and what's happened in the last few years, especially in the last 2 years, the U.S. has become relatively less important to China as an export market. Their exports to us have become more mature, and they're expanding their penetration into other markets, and that's increasing the role of other economies becoming more important to the Chinese. It also, from the flip side of that, makes us less important as a trade partner economy to China, and we don't foresee that ending. It's really a maturation of China as a producer selling to the rest of the world. So finally, let me wrap up with some implications I can draw for the port community. And I'm going to separate this into the short run of what we have to do with the recession and then the long run. In the short run, really, to put it frankly, the port customers are in survival mode. There are many companies that may not even survive this. We've seen that on the trucking side. We're going to see it in the ocean carrier side, perhaps. Some that may survive but be consolidated or merged. All of those having dislocation and job reductions, unfortunately. Tremendous pressure from their customers to minimize costs, to lower rates, to try to all of them collectively survive. Companies trying to push on each other to share the pain, if you will. But long term, there will be rebounding and increasing trade. And in fact, just to provide some perspective, it won't be too many years when if we talk together again, we're going to be back to worrying about port volumes pushing capacity limitations. In this recession, I'm glad to see the ports continuing on their development programs, but we know that some of the carriers, some of the other companies aren't able to sustain that, and that may be sowing the seeds of some difficulty several years down the road in recovery, where we don't have adequate capacity to serve the trade volumes that will rebound and will grow again, and we'll be back at levels greater than we had in 2006. So I don't want us to take the eye off the ball in terms of the long-term policy decisions that we make, in terms of being able to provide the capacity, the infrastructure needed to handle growing trade for a growing economy in the long term. Now, very importantly for San Pedro Bay, the pace of growth through the ports will be affected by the total delivered costs for the cargo, including the total port costs, as well as costs of rail and truck portions of inland shipments. This means for the roughly half of the cargo that's coming through the San Pedro Bay Gateway that's going somewhere else other than the local markets in Southern California, that cargo could be shifted somewhere else. And the combination of factors that can affect that are not completely under control of the community here, unfortunately. But some of them are, and those should be taken into consideration in any of the discussions that go forward. And my last point here is the dimensions of that are complex and have to be understood that they're interrelated in terms of the decision making and the behavior that will induce on shippers making decisions in the long run. So environmental, energy, infrastructure, and labor conditions all will influence that discretionary cargo, where it decides to go, how it will be handled in the future, and whether or not the port jobs stay here or shift somewhere else in terms of handling that portion of the trade that can be shifted somewhere else. So thank you for your time. That concludes my remarks, and I look forward to the rest of the workshop. Thank you very much.
A decade ago, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach projected that sustained cargo growth would continue indefinitely. Market trends indicated this was a safe bet. American outsourcing patterns of manufacturing and the rising levels of phenomenal factory production in China and the Far East supported these assumptions. Population growth and voracious consumer demand for Far Eastern goods throughout the United States made importing through the West Coast logical and essential. No other port facilities had the combination of capacity, speed, and local market for goods, as well as the infrastructure, to handle the volumes that entered the ports of LA and Long Beach. Today, market forces are buffeting the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Cargo traffic has declined over the past 2 years. This is particularly true for imports. Economic trends, including a global credit crisis, fluctuation in oil prices, and fears of a steep worldwide recession have contributed to this decline. And now there is more competition for delivery routes. The next decade promises a fight for discretionary cargo. The regional population may grow, but the consumers east of the Rockies could find their goods delivered through a variety of routes and methods in competition with West Coast ports in general and the LA Long Beach Harbor in particular.
Well, if we're going to be competitive, we obviously need to improve the productivity of moving goods. But the productivity of moving goods involves not just simply the ILWU and the terminal operators, but involves dealing with the infrastructure, being able to move those goods throughout our region and throughout the nation. So you're really looking at a much larger problem. We were able to sustain the overall growth in trade pretty much because there was some capacity. But now as the terminals have improved and are pretty much built out. The reality is that we now need to think about the infrastructure issues, how we're going to get the goods not only to serve the consumers within the region, but more importantly, how those goods are going to be distributed across the United States if we're going to remain really a port of entry.
In previous years, stakeholders in the ports of LA and Long Beach were concerned largely with two issues. The first one was how to sustain growth with an infrastructure bulging at the seams and a demand for more goods rising unabatedly. The second issue was the negative impact on the environment and quality of life for Southern Californians besieged by congested freeways and choked by port-related pollution from fossil fuel exhaust. Most of the other issues were related to these two. Developments like Pier Pass and the San Pedro Bay Clean Air Action Plan came to fruition proactively in response to these concerns. Security and safety was a separate issue brought into sharp focus by the events of 9/11. Potential competition from other ports and other routes seemed inconsequential compared to the challenges that appeared on the horizon. Factors that rendered LA Long Beach less competitive included fees, congestion, environmental restrictions, and infrastructure inadequacies. California's greenhouse gas emissions mandates are the most progressive in the nation and would have promised a very complicated and daunting future for the harbor in any case. Regardless, competition for cargo was a lesser concern in the past because major ocean carriers and large ports controlled logistical arrangements through their advantages of size and capacity. Today, the evolution and consolidation of big box stores and major discount retailers has put those shippers in control of vast amounts of goods. This volume leverage has given them the power to encourage distribution and warehouse development in geographically dispersed communities willing to compete across the country. Contracts for less volume in shorter delivery cycles allow shippers to spread out costs and diversify delivery risks by using multiple ports.
We do monitor what's going on in other trade routes, especially the ones that compete with us. And we look at the timing of those projects. And, now that we're sort of in a downturn in volume, things in Mexico appear to have slowed down. From our perspective, we see the investment in infrastructure that we have to do as paramount in keeping our competitive advantage.
Expansion of the Panama Canal and increased use of the Suez Canal will give shippers two more options for supplying goods to the eastern half of the United States. An expanded Panama Canal, if able to handle the largest container ships, will have a major impact on how merchandise is delivered east of the Rockies. Shippers will have the option of bypassing the west coast of North America. Some reports indicate a larger Panama Canal could effectively eliminate the Midwestern market from West Coast ports. Other threats emanate from ports in Mexico, linked by a logistical network which could deliver goods from Asia by rail across the border all the way north to Kansas City. Tacoma and Seattle, Washington will improve their rail access and port facilities to handle more inbound cargo traffic. Yet another competing route has been developed in Prince Rupert, British Columbia. The so-called Northwest Gateway manages to cut at least 30 hours of ocean shipping time from Asia. It then connects the Canadian rail network to the U.S. heartland from Winnipeg to Chicago and Memphis and continues all the way down to the Gulf Coast.
I think there's always concern. I think you have to continue to look in your rearview mirror to make sure that Southern California ports continue to be the gateway for goods coming from the Trans-Pacific. That being said, cargo wants to come to Southern California. There's a large captive consumer base. There's great intermodal connections. We have deep water, good weather, a very developed distribution and warehouse system. So to the extent that we can continue to make it the port of choice, that's what we want to do, and I think we're well positioned to do that.
Manufacturing growth patterns in South America could tilt a large portion of trade toward the Atlantic, as could aggressive factory development in South Asia. In particular, South Asian factories could make the Suez Canal route more attractive for delivery to the East Coast. Railroad infrastructure and capacity in the LA Long Beach harbor has come under scrutiny by many who believe it is not up to the task of maintaining an efficient, cost-effective flow from the ports to the Midwest. Rail development to the interior of the country is beyond local control. However, within the scope of local operations is the development of more on-dock rail capacity, which will be essential for any future growth. Additionally, warehousing may need to be pushed farther east. Other states and local governments have demonstrated a willingness to invest in port infrastructure, development, and distribution facilities which will be needed to accommodate growth along the Gulf and East Coasts. Governmental leaders in Seattle and Canada in the Northwest, Virginia on the Atlantic coast, and Houston on the Gulf Coast are willing to invest generous amounts of government funding in job-creating goods movement infrastructure projects. Simultaneously, those officials are willing to streamline environmental review so that these projects can be developed in time to take advantage of new opportunities. The perception is that in spite of initiatives like Proposition 1B, a similar commitment to prioritizing infrastructure funding does not exist in the Golden State.
Well, I think one of the motivation that shippers have is they want to diversify their portfolio. They don't have the confidence that we in Southern California or in the state of California are going to seriously do the kinds of things that we need to support the growth of those ports. And if we're not going to do those kinds of things, then they need to look at alternative ports of entry. And whether we're dealing with Prince Rupert or we're dealing with a potential port in Mexico, they don't really care. What they care about is that they get their goods to a marketplace.
Fees for container handling that are utilized for environmental mitigation in the LA Long Beach harbor are viewed as a disincentive that might scare away business in the short term. The uncertainty that exists regarding development and implementation of the Clean Truck program also limits confidence in the ability of local ports to remain competitive. However, these types of fees are not entirely unique to LA and Long Beach, and the programs they fund could help support both infrastructure development and long-term changes in the industry that will make the ports more viable in the long term. These efforts could also become models for other ports as well. Industry stakeholders can and will support fees if the transparency of the process leads to specific, measurable improvements that will directly generate more efficient goods movement.
You know, our customers have made investments in this port, and some of them will tell me, you know, I got a terminal here. I want to fill up, you know, the terminal in Los Angeles. I don't want to go to Prince Rupert. I mean, that's actually what they'll tell me because they have investments here, and they need to pay for their investment in the infrastructure just like we need to pay for the investment in the infrastructure. So there's a motivation to come here because of that reason, and the motivation to come here for the market. So I think we'll always have, you know, that in our favor.
Most ports across the country and the rest of the world will have to get on the same bandwagon that we are right now. I mean, I think what we've recognized is that you can grow, and you can grow green, and you can position yourself for more growth in the future. Some of the things that we're doing now, other ports will be doing in the future. We may have lost a little bit of discretionary cargo over the last year or so, but I think that's cargo that we can certainly get back. When other ports start to have challenges with congestion or public health impacts, I think they're going to recognize that we were really pioneers, and we're, like I said, we're growing so that we can position ourselves for that growth when it comes back.
Decision makers in the LA Long Beach harbor have to consider the risks of standing pat to weather the storm of economic decline and negative market trends, or the opposite risk of alienating customers by raising container handling fees for eventual improvements. Efficiency in the future and what that might entail for labor, the local economy, and the logistics industry will also need to be addressed. The ports of LA and Long Beach will continue to handle the cargo needs of a large regional population. The question is whether discretionary cargo will continue to pump vital new life into the local economy as the gateway for goods to America, or if the local harbor will become a facility that only sustains the needs of the consumers that reside in its shadow.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Joe Magadino, and it is my distinct pleasure to serve as your moderator for this evening's panel discussion. Will the panelists please take their position on the stage? As the panelists are getting settled, let me briefly review the procedures for the next hour. After introducing the panelists, I will ask each one a question or two. After those questions are completed, I will then open the floor for questions from the audience. I would kindly refer you to page 2 of your program, where you will find, under the heading Town Hall Format and Guidelines, the regulations that will govern the Q&A segment of our program. As you might be able to see, we have microphones in this section and as well as in the my left-hand side of the hall. If you wish to ask a question, I ask that you please state your name, your affiliation, and that you address your question to a specific panel member. You will have 1 minute to complete that task. And I remind you of the dilemma of free speech. Everyone has something worth saying, but not everything said is worth listening to. So please stay on topic. No long-winded presentations disguised as a question, and let me strongly suggest that you write your question down and then read it, as this will help in organizing your thoughts and in framing your question. There will be no multi-part questions and no discussion concerning particular terminals or operations. Instead of asking a question through the microphones, you may choose to ask a question by completing a 3x5 card, which are available from an usher. Again, I ask that you list your name and affiliation when you submit your question. The usher will take your card and bring it down to me, and I will ask your question. As your moderator, it is my discretion to reject a question as inappropriate, defer questions as having already been asked or answered, or redirect questions to another panelist. I am here to facilitate the discussion and ensure that we maintain the proper decorum for the exchange of ideas. Before introducing our distinguished panel members, allow me to remind you yet again of the themes that have already been presented. Paul Bingham indicated that recessions are temporary, although this recession, as measured by historical standards, is of longer duration and much steeper than we think as typical. As the U.S. economy and the global economy recover, trade will return. However, over the long term, the pace of the growth of that trade through our ports will be influenced by our capacity constraints, the labor conditions, the cost associated with moving goods through the supply chain, as well as the environmental policy and regulations that affect our region. The video stressed the importance of discretionary cargo to our ports. Roughly 1/2 of the imported goods serve local and regional markets, and as such, the San Pedro ports are the preferred port of entry. But the remaining half of the imported goods, the discretionary cargo, which historically have chosen our ports, they have alternatives. They can seek entry via other West Coast ports or other shipping lanes. This evening, we hope to develop a better understanding of the importance of discretionary cargo for job growth. Not only the growth of jobs along our docks, but the growth of jobs in our region associated with the goods movement industry. The key to our region's prosperity is to sustain job growth. In the interest of time, I will follow my colleague from USC, Jen Giuliano, and I will keep the speaker introductions very brief, and I ask that you refer to your program for a more detailed biographical sketch of each of our speakers. But please begin by joining me in welcoming our speakers tonight. To my immediate left is Mr. Dan Mylor. Mr. Mylor is Custom Broker Administration Manager at Carmichael International Services, and he will provide us a perspective from a shipper broker. Mr. Dave Arsenault is going to provide us a perspective from the ocean carrier. Mr. Arsenault is Vice President
Hyundai Merchant Marine. The viewpoint of the railroads will be provided by Mr. Scott Moore. Mr. Moore is Vice President, Public Affairs, West for the Union Pacific Railroad. Ms. Patty Senecal will provide the perspective for warehouse and intermodal trucking. Ms. Senecal is Director, Government Affairs, International Warehouse Logistics Association. So my first question is to Mr. Mylor. For discretionary cargo, that is the cargo that's destinations are east of the Rockies, have the San Pedro Bay ports lost their status as the preferred port of entry for cargo owners? If so, why? Is this the increased competition from other ports? Is it the policy environment and the cost of moving goods through the terminals? Or is it the region's congested goods movement corridors?
Well, yes, definitely. Los Angeles and Long Beach has lost that crown of being the preferred port for importers out of the area. It's happened for a while now. It's a tough situation because I've been very proud of the work that goes on in these ports, the port development, the way things have been working out, the way we dealt with congestion. Congestion is not a problem anymore. Pure Pass made a big dent on that. But the problem we have here is there's a lot of programs that are going on, not just here in this port, but in other, with the government, that has put a real strain on importers and shippers at a time when they can least afford it. We've got some government agency regulations that are just coming into effect that just this year, early part of this year, you have the advance data that all importers have to supply before something goes on a ship. That took a lot of work and a lot of money to put that together. You've got the Safe Port Act that forced that. You've got the Lacey Act amendments, which restricts a lot of imports or information that's needed for imports, so people are a little bit more afraid to import. You've got the consumer protection safety rules that have come out where a lot of people just can't import stuff that they could last year. But then you top it off with the new issues that are coming up in these ports. We talk about the Clean Action Plan is probably the biggest part of it. This plan has been something that's been in the works for over a year, almost 2 years, and there's been a lot of unstable information about it going out to the rest of the country. Will it happen? Won't it happen? How's it going to work? What is it going to cost me? At a time when companies can least afford it, they're cutting back, they're laying people off. They can't afford people to help track and take care of the cost of what's going on in this port. Pure Pass locally, if you have a Pure Pass fee, if you're a local importer, you have to pay Pure Pass fees for a 40-foot container of $100. If you're not sure about which truck you're going to pick up, so it could be another $70 in port check. There's a proposal out there for infrastructure fees. $15 to $30 on that. And then, of course, there's always that looming Lowenthal bill that goes away and then comes back after you do something that satisfies what he requested, and then he brings it back anyway. So you're looking almost at $200 in additional fees just to come into these ports. At a time when the economy's bad, that is a rough thing to deal with. On top of the fees, now this is talking about the discretionary cargo, there's this new rule of port check. You have to claim every container. You've seen the webinars, or if anybody that has, they've come out and said, well, this is the way it's going to work, this is what's going to happen, and then a month later, they change the rules. Then they question whether it's really going to happen. There's been court cases and stuff. A lot of people have been in denial. But there's a hidden cost to this that people forget, and that's declaring the port check. You have to have somebody do it, you have to hire staff to do it, or you have to pay a service provider to make the claim. So the fee for port check is increased by almost 50% by people having to make sure it gets done. And so that's a cost that a lot of importers can't bear at this time, or they don't want to deal with it. They've got too many other things that are hitting their pockets now with government regulation and other challenges. When Pure Pass came into play, the rates to Los Angeles were lower than other places, so the fees for Pure Pass to break out the congestion still made the port competitive. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. The rates are pretty much competitive along the coast and to other locations, and these other fees are making the port not competitive as it used to be. And the problem of trying to deal with it and figuring out the rules and understanding how it works, I was in a conference call yesterday dealing with a number of brokers that represent a lot of shippers, And they still don't understand how it works. I had to explain how the RFID works and how the fact is you can't plan a fee on the port check because you don't know what kind of truck it is, and you don't know if it's going to be partially a fee in Long Beach where it's free in LA. And so it's hard for them to try to quote services to an importer, and the importer wants to know what his bottom line is going to be so he can plan his business. So there's some challenges there in a program that was kind of just, they made a decision they're going to do it, and there wasn't a lot of feedback from the trade on how it's going to work.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arsenault, are decisions to move discretionary cargo to ports other than the San Pedro Bay driven by customer requests or by the business model of ocean carriers?
Actually, there's a combination of both of those elements that goes into the flow of goods. As we saw on the video, there's a very large base of large retailers that command a tremendous amount of volume and attention as a result from the ocean carrier community. I lead a sales organization that flies around the country negotiating these contracts with these such companies, and the word that comes up in this particular environment is the word of survival. Everyone is in a fight for survival, whether you're on the customer side, the retail side, the carrier side. So costs have taken on a whole new light. When the economic times were good, an extra $50 here or $100 there perhaps didn't make that much of a difference. But in this particular environment, it really is driven by consumer behavior. Everyone in this market is looking for the best quality product for the lowest possible cost. And in order to deliver that, there's tremendous pressure that is exerted on all the stakeholders in the supply chain to deliver on that, in that regard. We've seen cycles like this before, where we see a particular trade lane might be down, but what makes this particular cycle very unique is that in prior cycles, we may have seen a downturn in the Trans-Pacific trade, but that was largely offset by an uptick in trade that may have been taking place between Asia and Europe, for example. We don't have that in this particular environment. This is the first time we're really finding the entire global economy in the tank at the same time simultaneously. So in coming back to this particular question, it is a combination of both the carriers and the customers. We are finding that in very real terms right now with discretionary cargo. Since February 18th, when we began to assess at the ports this clean truck fee, I've had my phone ringing off the hook with importers and exporters who are looking for alternative gateways. And it's not just the sake of a $70 fee or $35 per TEU. Most of these businesses have also gone through a downsizing, and they don't have the resources administratively inside their organizations any longer to even go through the claiming of their cargo that's required as a mandate to move goods through this particular gateway. So would prefer to just avoid that altogether. And we're seeing a shift now of cargo that had been moving through this particular gateway up into the Pacific Northwest, particularly Seattle and Tacoma, have been a beneficiary of that. You won't see that yet in the statistics. But as you go deeper into March, April, and into May and June, I think you will see this trend continue. Carriers, on the other hand, also have a stake in that game. And that is some of this discretionary cargo that may be routed or destined ultimately to the Midwest, Chicago, or the Northeast, New York. There are other alternatives that make sense, both economically and in the physical flow of the goods. And that is through, say, the Pacific Northwest, or through a Prince Rupert, or even through a Vancouver. However, cargo destined to, say, the Gulf area, Houston, Dallas, or even Atlanta, the Pacific Northwest is still not at this point a viable alternative for cargo routed into that particular gateway, because the cost avoidance in one particular gateway is more than offset by the incremental cost for inland rail or truck to serve those particular points. And that's the area that we need to really look at for this particular gateway of trying to retain as much as possible.
Thank you very much. Our next panelist is the mystery panelist who I neglected to introduce, and I apologize, Mr. Alan McCorkle from AMP, and he, of course, is going to give us the perspective from the port and terminal side of the operation. So my question to you, Alan, is do the terminal operators have any say in the decisions that ocean carriers make to relocate discretionary cargo to other ports?
You know, Joe, I guess the first thing I was going to say, I thought this would be the easiest panel I had because you skipped me an introduction, so I didn't think I'd be able to have any questions either. So you caught me off guard on this one. Do we have a say? That's a great question. I'll answer it this way and tell you that. Actually, let me do this. Let me follow up on something Dave just said. You know, he talks about the movement of discretionary cargo to the Pacific Northwest, and we're getting this firsthand. And if you're a steady at the APM Terminals facility in the Port of Los Angeles, we've had this conversation over the last couple of weeks. But we've got a 6,000 move ship, Maersk Line ship that comes through Southern California right now. It's called our TP9 service that effective May 1st no longer call here. Maersk Line got into a vessel sharing arrangement with another steamship line, and a lot of the cargo that's on that ship, the discretionary cargo that's on that ship, is now going to be going to Seattle. And when you look at, whether it's you look at these videos, the video that was done, which I think was outstanding and really summed up everything, or what the other two panelists have already said, we've lost that cargo, and it was discretionary cargo. Did we have input on that? I say, yeah, we did. Because, and I want to say it wasn't immediate. It was over the last couple of years as we have talked about the fees, and we've talked about the cost to do business in Southern California, and our customers have told us that you've got to get the cost down, you've got to do something to address these fees, we need your help. And as we've tried to engage, and as we have engaged the, you know, whether it's the LW workforce or the port authorities to address that, it was always that hanging over your head that this cargo could leave us. And I think that that's what we see on May 1st. We're going to have 6,000 less moves coming into Southern California because, you know, what if it was, and obviously there are other market factors that are part of this thing, but when you're putting fees like we do in this environment, in the terminal operators we have our fees too, but when you put the fees in there and you can go to a place like Seattle and there are no fees, what are you going to do as a decision maker? And when you look at the map and you look at land cost and labor cost, and I'll tell you in our global network, the APMT's global network, when you look at land and labor cost and the whole global network, and you see the highest dollar figures for both of those in Southern California, and you have other options, what decision are you going to make? And that's what's happened. And I think that you know, as we progress through this turbulent time we have right now, there's even more pressure on us to address those issues, all those issues. And it's working with all the stakeholders to get into that. So as a terminal operator on the West Coast, you know, we talk to the carriers every day. We talk to the beneficial cargo owners every day. And I'll tell you the message is pretty consistent. And it's something that we collectively have to do together to come together to address all these issues because the cargo is leaving. And it's not just because of the economy, it's a double whammy. It's the economy where there is less volume coming through the ports. And then the second piece is the fact that there's more competition out there that can do it at a lower rate. And in today's market, and in tomorrow's market, and next year's market, and the year after that market, that low cost is going to drive that business. And it's going to go that direction. And we're trying to do what we can as a terminal operator to work with all the various stakeholders to first bring this to everyone's attention, and then secondly, see what actions that we can take to be a part of this thing to keep the cargo here.
Alan, there are an awful lot of people in the audience that are members of the ILWU, and I'm wondering if you think about sort of the longer term, not the short term, but the longer term, what role does labor play in trying to solve these problems?
You know, they play a huge role. First thing, let me say this, that I'll give you three things I think that the ILWU has that or what they should do or are doing in some degrees now that need to continue to do and do more of. And the three things I can give you are, you know, is their voice, their understanding, and their flexibility. The ILWU has a, you know, they have a very loud voice. They have a loud voice in Washington. They have a loud voice with the customers, and they are a player. They're a political player, and they're a big-time player, the ILWU is. Their leadership, as is their membership. And we have to, and I've seen some things happen recently, especially with Local 13 and working with, you know, organizations such as the Pacific Merchant Shipping, the PMSA Shipping Association, to try and come together with the industry to do positive things. And we need that voice more. We needed it a year ago. We're getting it now. Let's keep that going. We got to build off of that. We also need their understanding. The understanding of what we saw in Paul Bingham's presentation or what we saw in that video are real. Prince Rupert is real. There's cargo going through Prince Rupert very effectively through Prince Rupert into Chicago that was cargo coming through here. There's cargo that's going through Seattle that was coming through here. So we need their understanding that this is happening. And truly understand that this is not the seasonal short-term slump. We have approximately 150 cranes in the LA Long Beach Harbor. There are about 55 gangs that came out that are working tonight. A year ago, there were probably about 85 gangs working. And over the Chinese New Year period, over the last couple of weeks, where we had a 50% volume drop, cargo drop, there were about 26 gangs out, or 33 gangs out. And those are the real gang numbers, because I see them every day. And for all the LW members in here, I know that you're feeling it also. So these numbers are real, and it's not just a dip, it's going to keep happening. So we need your understanding. Last thing I'll say is the flexibility. And I'm happy to report we're getting this now. But we need more of it. And everything I'm talking about, we need more of. The flexibility. We have a union we work with at Pier 400 that represents our office clerical workers. They have a pretty tough contract for us. It's a great contract for them. They negotiate it and they earn what they got. When the economic times are tough like they are now, it is sometimes tough to, it's not always the right thing to live by the word of that contract. And we need flexibility from the union to give us financial relief on some of the manning that we do. And they've done that. And we need more of that. So we have to have that flexibility. We went through a contract negotiation last year where we put a man back in the operation that we had shown that we did not need. But we put that person back in there at a cost of about $30 million annually to the industry. That doesn't help the cost picture. And I think that, moving forward, as we talk about these three things, the voice, the understanding, and the flexibility, I think that we're on the right track. I think the union's on the right track. They're a great workforce. They work hard for us at Pier 400. And the ones that have been, that I said again, are part of our steady workforce at Pier 400, and we've had meetings over the last couple months, they do a great job for us. But in the big picture, there are things that have to be done differently than we've done in the past 20 years. Because when the volumes do come back, and if you saw Paul's charts, when you see the recovery, it doesn't recover back to the level it was earlier, earlier in the decade or a decade ago. When it comes back, it doesn't come back at that level, and it's not. And people need to understand that we have to have flexibility to maybe try and get it back that level. So those are the three things, Joe, that I would say are the things that we have to really focus on with LWU.
Thank you very much. Mr. Moore, some have argued that increases in railroad shipping rates through the San Pedro Bay ports by as much as 30% over the last few years drive discretionary cargo to other ports. Stated somewhat differently, how does Union Pacific balance the desire to improve its revenue position against the need to improve its infrastructure?
Well, the simple answer to the first question is, in my opinion, no, we don't think so. But before I explain that, I just wanted to commend you, Joe, and Cal State Long Beach, as well as Mary Ann and all the people here, to take the time to understand more about what's going on here at your San Pedro Bay ports, because at least through communication, we can help solve some of those problems. And so let me explain more about why I said no to a rate increase. Have our rates gone up in Union Pacific and the rail rates generally for both railroads serving here in the last number of years? Yes, they have. Now, in some ways, actually in 2009, many of them will go down because a fuel surcharge goes away. But the reason those rates increased is, if you go back to your video screen, there was the concern about the ability of the railroads, and do the railroads have the capacity to service these two ports? And that's been a question. You go back to 2002, 2003. Some will argue, no, the railroads didn't, particularly our railroads specifically. And so the fact is, the intermodal business, which is in my railroad at least, is about 20% of our business. Second to coal, energy is a business, almost even with industrial products. And there's an auto business, which is not quite what it once was, I may add, as well as a chemical business and as well as a grain business. But the fact is, if you're going to invest in the intermodal part of our business, you have to have a rate that lets you do that. And the fact is, in Union Pacific's case at least, we think that we put our money where our mouth is there. The fact is, we announced today the opening of an intermodal facility in San Antonio. A couple years ago, opened a new one in Dallas. A couple years ago, opened a new one in Salt Lake City. have announced one in Joliet and Chicago market, because that terminal capacity needs to be there to move that product inland like that comes through the San Pedro Bay ports, and we're doing that. Probably more specifically for LA Long Beach, and the fact is, my company, like other railroads, is port neutral. I mean, the railroad goes to Seattle, Portland, Tacoma, Oakland, LA Long Beach. We have 6 border crossings in Mexico, as well as the Gulf ports. We do go everywhere. But if you really look at where this railroad has spent its money, we're spending our money not paving the way, but railing our way here to LA Long Beach. And if we're not going to do anything to screw up that literally $1 billion investment building that rail here. You know, right now, we have spent the last 3 years double tracking our rail from LA Long Beach to El Paso for the intermodal business. We're trying to build and having great progress with an intermodal facility and a facility out west of El Paso. Trying to build a facility in Tucson that will service all of our rail products. And then, of course, we're investing here in the LA Basin and trying and asking to grow in the Port of LA, Port of Long Beach with an ICTF facility, which would be just like the SCIG facility that the BN's trying to construct, the greenest facility in the world. And so we're doing it right, we're doing it green, but most importantly, that rate is investing in the capacity to haul the containers inland from LA Long Beach, and we wouldn't be doing anything to cannibalize that business. We're betting billions on it.
From your perspective, what do you see as the major bottlenecks in moving cargo, either in the region or throughout the nation?
Well, obviously when you're railroad, you see the train just going down the track 80 mile an hour, and doesn't it all move like that? Well, the problem is there's bottlenecks out there. One of the most famous bottlenecks here in Southern California is a place out in Colton, where the Burlington Northern Santa Fe and the Union Pacific, all of the rail traffic in the LA Basin crosses at grade at a crossing that's been there 120 years. I mean, when you have things like that, it backs up from there. And so obviously that's a very costly piece of infrastructure that we continue to advance the possibility of a private-public partnership to not only create benefits inland for an environmental standpoint, but certainly increase capacity to serve the port down here as well. Another one of the things that continues to concern the freight rail industry. I go into Washington, D.C., and I was there last week. I go into Sacramento, and the first thing any elected official says, railroad, I rode a train once. It's all about passenger rail. And the fact is, we're in the freight rail business, and we get into a lot of black eyes in this state arguing that we need to preserve the freight rail corridors for freight. And sometimes our passenger friends are quite forceful and stop some of our progress. And the fact is, if we're going to move your freight out of here, we're going to have to fight that battle, and we'd like some friends helping us.
Thank you very much. Ms. Senecal, at the local and regional level, the ports and the AQMD have undertaken initiatives and policies to improve environmental quality. At the state level, our governor and legislature want California to be at the forefront in environmental policy. And at the federal level, the new administration in Washington promises a strong agenda in improving the environment. While we all agree that environmental quality is important, policymakers are not moving in tandem. If you could tell policymakers of the impacts of their decisions on the good movement industry, what would you say?
I would say they need to slow down and they need to get it right. And we need to also look at the layering effect of all these new regulations that are coming at us. And we have now decisions being made about one particular sector. We'll have a ship rule, we'll have a train rule, a truck rule. And at the end of the day, we really need to sit down. The supply chain, goods movement works as a system. Ports, trucks, railroads, labor, distribution centers, and we can't isolate these rules anymore. We need to look at the supply chain all the way across because we compete for cargo. And one, as an example of this, slow down and get it right, in December of this year that just passed, 2008, California has passed the most aggressive and most expensive climate change plan in the world, California on its own. Okay? We need to compete as a state with our bordering states, with other ports, throughout the supply chain. So now we have this very expensive climate change plan that's not just on goods movement, it's coming to your home and your car soon as well. But again, what is the price of being first? And as an example of this, what comes to mind very quickly is California going to adopt a new fuel for California, a low carbon fuel standard in April. We don't know what's in the fuel. It's some kind of additive to take some of the petroleum-based products out of it. And yet, we don't know what it is. It's going to be in the marketplace by 2010, coming by truck. By the way, it can't go in the pipeline since it has a fuel additive. We're very soon to have a new fuel that has yet to be determined. We don't know what it's going to cost at the pump. We don't know if there's enough supply. We went through this in '93 with huge outages and fuel spikes and trucks breaking down. And here we go again with a new fuel. So as a decision makers, what we need to really look at is not to be first, but to get it right. So when we get it right, we have a sustainable plan, and we need to look at the entire supply chain and look at the competitiveness. And there's a big push now for electricity, electric trucks, electrify everything. Well, electricity generally comes from coal. Coal is carbon. And so again, are we on the right path? What is our long-term path? And for California in particular, competitiveness. And when you get into climate change, it's in the air everywhere. So if California goes first and gets it wrong, and the other states don't opt in, we're left to go alone, going this alone, and the other states will gladly take our business. When I give presentations, the people on the East Coast love to hear all these regulations in California. They sit there and clap because they know the cargo's coming to them. And you know, as a California person, that deeply concerns me. So my message to politicians is slow down, let's get it right. Let's get it right from the start. And we need to look at goods movement as a system and the layering effect of the entire supply chain. It's not 10 cents on the shoe, as we hear over and over with environmental regulations. If you add them all up, you're probably looking at another $20 on the shoe. And so again, it's a system, and we need to have a systems approach and a systems solution, and it really needs to be statewide. We don't support having patchwork, each city coming up with their own rules and regulations. It's too expensive, and it's not productive for us.
Let me follow up on a somewhat different question. During the good times when cargo traffic was growing, it was oftentimes said that there was a driver shortage that potentially may have been exacerbated by the Transportation Workers Identification credential requirement. Is the fall off in cargo masking issues related to future truck availability?
To begin with, when you talk about the good times, there's a lot of warehouses and trucking companies down here. We kind of laugh about, remember the good old days when trucks were lined up for miles? That's kind of a joke because those days are far from gone. But just to give you a snapshot of our population from the intermodal perspective, at one point we believe from the port's data there were 16,800 trucks in this port. That is the largest footprint of trucking probably in the world in this sector, and about 1,300 motor carriers. Right now in the concessionaire program there's roughly 900 concessionaires, so that's down from 1,300, and close to 15,000 trucks in the driver truck registry. And of those, we believe the TWIC card amount is about 10,000 drivers with activated TWIC cards, whether they're intermodal and or trucking in general. So trucking has done a very good job of getting their TWIC cards and activating them. The trucking industry has supported TWIC from the start, from the American Trucking Association, and we will see fallout from TWIC. Don't know exactly what it's going to be, but if there are roughly right now 15,000 trucks, 10,000 of them have their activated TWIC cards, we're well on the way. As far as unmasking, what I want to unmask is that those slides talked about cargo diverting from 2006. I can tell you from the distribution center perspective, it started after the labor lockout in 2002. We started seeing our customers say, you know what, they had a big awakening that we can't leave all our cargo in one port, and they developed this really sophisticated management theory called don't put all your eggs in one basket. And so we've seen since 2002 our customers starting to look at other gateways, starting to diversify, and then we hit congestion in 04, 05 again, and so now this is really pretty much a common practice now is to diversify cargo. So I just want to make clear that it didn't start in 2006. We've actually moved cargo into Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. As far as unmasking, I think what we're worried about right now is that there's a lot of uncertainty for the trucking companies and the warehouses that run their own trucks or get serviced by trucks. Tons of court action going on. We're waiting for the Ninth Circuit to rule. There's going to be probably, we read it's going to the Supreme Court in California. When does all this settle down? Bottom line is, out of these 15,000 trucks in the truck registry, 3,500 of them are clean trucks, 207 engine compliant emission standards. We have about 7,500 trucks between now and the end of the year to either retrofit, if there's a retrofit, and or replace. And so for us, unmasking is, we have a crisis brewing. Even with the downturn in cargo, certainly we don't need as many trucks, but there's a lot of trucks that have to get replaced in a very short amount of time, swirling with litigation and too much uncertainty for the motor carriers, for the drivers, and for our customers. Again, uncertainty drives business to do things differently. This port has too much uncertainty.
Thank you very much. I'm now ready to accept questions from the audience. I remind you that there are two ways of asking a question. You can either queue up at a mic on your right or on the left, or you can provide us with a 3x5 card. I'll take questions by alternating first at the mic on the right, then on the left, and then with the card. The first one on the card is for Mr. Mylor. In looking forward in the near and short term, in the near and far term, what is the single biggest cause of concern about moving goods through Southern California, and what's the first thing that needs to happen to address this concern?
That's a tough question because there's a lot of variables out there, as you've heard from the different panelists. But I think the biggest thing is there's an image here that things are happening that could stop cargo. As Patty was saying, they stopped putting all their eggs in this big basket, this wonderful big port, and started checking out other ports. Well, as there's a chance that their cargo might be stopped because they didn't claim this, or there's a chance that there may not be trucks here, there's a lot of publicity that was out there on all the things that have gone wrong over the last couple of years. First, the lockout really hit LA because we had the largest amount of cargo that was backed up. Then there was a congestion thing after that as we tried to work out, and we got going to Pier Pass. Now there's a port check. Then there's the threat of bills from Sacramento to put on fees. And people are leery of that. And we've got to, like Patty said, we've got to get things straightened out, have a straight line of what really is going to happen in this port and what can they expect so they can plan that into their prices. And they can feel comfortable that Los Angeles and Long Beach are the best ports to come through if the cost is right. But right now, there's a lack of stability of expectations of what's going to happen here over the next year. People are watching rather than accepting.
Thank you very much. Question for Ms. Senecal. Talked a little bit about infrastructure. Will developers continue to invest in warehousing here in the region given the current recession and the perception that discretionary cargo is being lost to other ports? If not, how will this affect the prospects for the good movement industry?
Short answer is no. When I talk to a lot of our land developers, they have zero growth projects for California in their portfolios. That is a host of many reasons, one of which is the CEQA laws here make it extremely difficult to build. California is like its own federal EPA. We have a lot of environmental laws for good reason, but it's getting to the point now where they're really, it's very difficult. You look at the port, 7-8 years to get projects off the drawing board, and they're resisted, and it's very difficult to develop. But a quick snapshot, Southern California, if you didn't know, is the largest, Southern California is the largest industrial sector in the United States, probably in the world, for distribution centers. There is 1.5 billion square feet of warehousing in our 5 counties, which are LA, Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura. So why has this become such a mega hub for distribution centers? Well, you have the largest ports in North America, or 5th biggest in the world. You have the largest rail facility, the BNSF, just up the street, the biggest population area and large GDP for California, and so naturally, and airlift out of Ontario LAX, a little bit out of John Wayne. So you have all the modes of transportation, a huge population, huge consumer base. So that's why the warehouses have become so strong here over the last 20 years. Over the next 6 months in these 5 same counties, we're going to have another 40 million square feet of inventory, whether it's vacant buildings coming back on the market or new projects that are being finished. Coming in. So right now, over the amount of square footage that we have historically tells us we absorb about 5 million square feet of warehousing a year. We have an 8-year inventory of warehouse availability in the market right now as a sign, too, of the bad economy. So will the development continue here? Has the market been saturated? I think part of it is the glitter has come off the diamond for Southern California. We can't build. We have road projects that don't seem to get off the ground, whether it's the 710, the 2 bridges that must be replaced. We seem to be choked down in politics and politicians and industry groups. I mean, you name it. The other thing is we now have greenhouse gas laws, or regulations, excuse me, coming, where buildings are going to have zero carbon footprint in the future. Again, more expensive to build, more difficult to run distribution centers. And I think what our land developers and those that do build buildings or build their own buildings, et cetera, how far out can they go where it becomes too expensive? If there's not enough clean trucks or those trucks are too expensive, how far can we go? There's discussions now about off-peak pricing on roads. So again, we're going to charge more to deliver the goods, and at some point all this stuff adds up. The off-peak in the harbors that was so successful, well, guess what? The communities don't like those trucks at night. And rightly so. We had one of our members who had to put in a $500,000 sound wall so they could take Pure Pass deliveries at night. And again, driving this cost through the supply chain. So as far as distribution centers, the market is, obviously we have inventory. I think California is probably built out for quite a while. We need to solve the uncertainty. We need to get our infrastructure up. We need to run these trucks better and smarter and make sure that our system is running efficiently so we can keep these warehouses full and see if we can get development back on track.
Thank you very much. Sir, are you ready?
My name is Paul Sanchez. I'm with the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, Local 13, Executive Board member. I just got a real simple question. If the infrastructure were to turn around tomorrow, could we practice environmentally sound practices such as cold ironing, electric trucks, to make for a more viable and well-structured harbor?
And do you want to direct that to someone, or?
Pretty much the lady that just finished talking.
Patty, you're on.
Hey, wait a minute. First of all, are my 2 brothers, my Longshore brothers here? Casey and Mike, did you show up tonight? You are so busted. One of them's here. Must be the, yeah. As far as electric trucks, far, 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 far in the future. They're in their infancy. The first truck out is $500,000. We're having problems right now affording $100,000 trucks. There's the infrastructure of charging. There's batteries plug in. There's electricity. Electricity comes from coal. What's the whole life cycle on this? Can it pull our loads? Frankly, most of our loads are too heavy. Electric is better on a flat land. It's too early. In the future, yeah, probably we're going to get there. But right now, it is not sustainable to run the weight of our loads and the volume of the loads, and then you have to factor in charging. They don't run a full shift. And so do you switch out trucks? How are you going to charge them? I mean, it's just too soon to be market ready at full force.
How about cold ironing?
I iron with my iron on hot, but I'll let the steamship line guy answer. Cold ironing.
Did any of the other panelists want to comment?
Cold ironing comes from electricity.
Yeah.
Paul, what was the question on cold ironing again?
Okay.
Ironing.
Mr. Corcoran, okay, you have the largest ships in the world, I'm pretty sure, like close to 10,000 TEUs, the Virginia Maersk. For environmentally, so they don't have to use their smokestacks and their on-ship generators, supporting cold ironing, in other words, plugging the ship in to a viably green environment on the dock. How far away are we from that?
Well, it's actually happening now, right? I think there's at least 2 terminals in the part of LA that are doing the cold ironing right now. And obviously there's pending regulation that's going to have, that's either going to, that's going to mandate cold ironing here in a few years, or something of its equivalent on cold ironing. So I think that, cold ironing is it's been talked about for years and years and years. It's actually happening now. And I think that the thing there is that that people need to understand is that there's other alternatives to, to having environmentally responsible ships. Maersk Line has done the low sulfur fuel thing, and I think you get a huge benefit, because you get that benefit as the ship's coming into harbor, as it comes into the harbor, while it's at dock, and while it comes out of harbor. Where something like cold ironing, you only get that benefit while it's at the dock. Whether if it is cold ironing or if it's the another alternative, it's all happening now in various degrees, and I think you're just going to see it continue to get better.
Do you have a question at this mic?
My name is Willie Lowe, Local 13. I got a question. Is there any way for us to lower the fees until the economy picks back up, and all of this cargo that's going to other ports, can like Seattle handle our volume, or are they just being greedy and taking our work?
I'll say, a couple of good questions there. I'll take you, let's take the second one first, and that is about, they can handle the work. The funny thing is that 4 years ago, everybody was chocker blocked. Everybody was choked out, especially Seattle, especially in Tacoma to some degree, but Seattle couldn't take any more cargo. What you see now, though, is in today's market, everybody's got capacity. And everybody's getting aggressive about getting that capacity by, offering the lowest rate they can. When a steamship line looks at where to call, there's 3 buckets of costs that they look at. They look at the ocean piece, which is what it costs to run the ships. They look at the land side, which is really the terminal operations. And then they look at the inland piece. And you get those 3 cost buckets in today's economy, in today's market, and what's going to be for the next few years, that's going to drive where the cargo goes. So they're probably glad to get it, but they're getting it because they're taking care of at least 2 of those 3. The water thing doesn't matter whether it's Seattle. Well, for the most part, it doesn't matter if it's Seattle or Southern California. But those other 2 buckets, the terminal operating costs and the inland costs, which is the railroads, that's huge, and that's how they're getting that business.
The other thing is Seattle is in an attainment zone, and so again, California, we have very strict environmental laws. We have non-attainment issues for the South Coast air quality basin, and so we are forced to deal with those, whereas a smaller port, they don't have the same CEQA law, and they're not in the same non-attainment areas. So again, that's a real big challenge for us to work on. But I think, as far as lowering the fees, there's a lot of discussion on the fees right now. And I think our port directors are hearing those comments, and we have faith that our port directors, will act appropriately. We have harbor commissioners. We'd like to thank Long Beach for sitting in and listening to this tonight. We have 2 commissioners and Dick. This is important. Thank you. Now lower the fees. No.
Dan, did you have a comment you wanted to add?
I would like to add something there as you talk about the fees. I'm going to refer back to the fact that you're talking the discretionary cargo. You've got a company in Omaha that's got cargo coming in on the West Coast. And now, because of the fees, they have to track what's coming into Los Angeles, Long Beach. They have to claim it. They have to track it, make sure it's claimed. If there's a problem on the claiming, they have to deal with it. A year ago, the cargo just came in and was delivered to Omaha. And when it got to Omaha, there was a customs entry filed. So now there's this extra work and hassle. And this is where a lot of importers just throwing up their hands and saying, why am I going to hassle with it? If it's the same rate going to Seattle to Omaha than LA, I know LA's got the better facilities, but I don't want to deal with the hassle of claiming the fees. I have to pay somebody to do it, or I have to do it myself. And this is something they didn't have to do before. We have to come up with a more streamlined way for discretionary cargo to be claimed either by the carrier because they're moving it with green trucks, there's no fee going on, or the fact that it's going on a rail, why do they have to even bother with the claim? The people in the Midwest and on the East Coast have some real problems in claiming it so they can guarantee that the cargo doesn't stop. And they're running on a fear factor, and why bother with it?
I have a question directed to Mr. Arsenault or Mr. McCorkle. We discussed the cost and diversion What about the risk from terrorism, piracy, and organized crime at these alternative gateways?
Well, let me take that one. I've spent a fairly significant amount of time with many of these large retailers and meeting with parts of their business that I hadn't traditionally met with. Usually it's the logistics or their traffic department, but more recently, or since 2001, there's been many more meetings with lawyers, with their marine insurance underwriters, et cetera. And it's not about the risks of alternative gateways, it's more about the risk of a catastrophic event in this gateway. And it was really driven in the aftermath of 9/11, where this port complex has been handling traditionally over 40% of the nation's commerce. And it comes back to that very modern management term, putting all their eggs in one basket. If you look at this particular complex, we've got Terminal Island and Island. We've got LA Long Beach combined, where customers who had 40, 50, 60, 70% of their volume flowing through this particular gateway felt that there was far too much risk, far too much exposure, and there was a great need to diversify the gateways that they are moving their cargo, so that if there was a catastrophic event in one of those particular gateways, it would not shut down their entire supply chain. It would shut down a portion of it, unquestionably, but it would not put them at risk of having all of their goods negatively affected. And this is something that is not going away. If anything, it's increasing in frequency, it's increasing in concern, and it's something that we've seen as a real measure, not just with alternative West Coast gateways, but we've also seen it with an increase in the East Coast all-water demand.
Thank you very much. I have a question over here.
Peter Payton with the ILWU. Alan, this is for you. Patty, I'll leave you alone for a second.
Thank you, Peter.
Actually, I want to thank everybody for coming, because it's been a number of years that we've been having these meetings and we haven't had a panel like this to be able to get to these questions. But what I really want to say is that the ILWU has been in Washington for many years. And Alan, when you made the comment that the power that we have, the one comment I would make when we look at money and we look at the different ways that things cost money, when we look at grade separations, that's really the system, as Patty said, and all of us coming together to fight to get those grade separations so we can move cargo more effectively. We need to do it together. When we look at port infrastructure, we need to be going to Washington together. When we look at healthcare, it's a cost. Now we're competing against Canada. We need to go there together. And when we look at the highway infrastructure, the highway trust fund, which is coming up, which is critical for Southern California to get those funds that we need to go there together. That hasn't happened yet.
But Peter, is there a question?
Yeah, but Alan, I'm asking the question to you. Are we ready to go to the Hill and say once and for all, we're here and these are the things we demand, because now we have the power of not just labor and community, but of the companies that we work for? That's my question, Joe.
Thank you.
Peter, it's good to see you again. I'll tell you that we have no choice. That's the short answer. We have no choice. The answer is yes. I mean, if you looked at what's happened over the last couple of years, and whether if it's the competition factor or the economy factor, the fact is that the days that we had before, we're never going to get back again. Okay, it's not going to happen, and the landscape is changed, and it's changed. And I will say, and this is, what we look at, or what, my opinion to some degree, but the landscape is forever changed. It will never be back like it was before, but we can minimize that. And Pete, I appreciate what you're saying, is because I think you guys do have a strong player in Washington, but between all the stakeholders, and that's the port authorities, the railroads, the shippers, the beneficial cargo owners, the terminal operators, the ILWU, and everybody does business down here, now's the time. It's never too late, by the way, but now's the time to come together and take on all these issues. And if we can do that and really get some good traction on that in 2009, I mean, something we can't just kind of talk about, and then hopefully it happens in a couple of years. But we do have to come together this year and start making some real positive traction to address all these issues. Because collectively, I think we can do it, and we can minimize that impact of this landscape change that's going to happen.
Dan, a question for you. Do you think that some of the recent regulation, particularly 10+2, has the potential to push towards offshoring of custom brokerage?
Oh, okay. That's a very sensitive question because by law, customs business must be done in the United States. They don't want it being produced overseas. So there's a question there of the legality of even doing the customs brokerage overseas. But the thing is that there is a supply chain and there's data coming through from the other side to here. Information has to come. And so the real question is, how is the data being dealt with, and are they following the regulations as they stand now?
Why don't you explain, no, Dan, explain 10+2,
just so you know, 10+2 is in the Safe Port Act, they came up and Customs had pushed through, worked with legislation that allows them to get more data elements so they can do more targeting on the merchandise coming to the United States. Previously to January, the only data that was on a manifest was shipper, consignee, what the merchandise was, number of cartons, and country of origin. Now they have the name of the supplier, they have the name of the seller, the name of the manufacturer, where they stuffed the location, who arranged that stuffing, and where it's going to, who's buying it here in the United States, and where it's being delivered to. This is all detailed so they can track down patterns of things that could be wrong. If you've got a location where it's an unsecured area where they're stuffing containers, they want to take a look at that. They want to review it before it gets here and determine whether it's going to get on the ship or not. It is a Safe Port Act enactment. It just went into effect on January 26. It's in a phase-in period. But by next year, every container, before it gets on a ship, will need additional data elements, including the classification of the goods rather than just by name, before it gets on a ship. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort that a lot of importers and shippers are going through right now, which is a major expense, which adds on to the other expenses they're running into when they're dealing with some of the problems with port fees, dealing with the environment and other regulations that are out there. Again, I said like CPSC, there's a lot of consumer safety issues out there. They're putting a lot of restrictions on imports, and so the markets can't bring in certain things. They're restricted, they have to test for the lead in a bicycle, that type of thing. The lead paint that goes on to a toy, that has to be tested, so there's expenses on tests. So it's getting more expensive to ship. And at a time when they're running into these expenses, to have other fees and things here in the port could be a problem.
Thank you very much. A question here.
Yes, my name is Tom Bartley. I'm an independent business analyst. My company is Tom Bartley Ideas. My question is to Scott with your railroad, and certainly you, Dan, is what technologies can we invest in to solve some of these problems, deliver the freight faster and less expensive?
Well, from a railroad's perspective, we're doing it. Here in Southern California, we put in 62 new switching locomotives in the last 2 years to decrease emissions by 80%. We are attempting to modernize a facility down here that would double the capacity, but at the same time decrease the footprint and decrease emissions by 75%. So there are things and technologies out there, but if you've been down here, you've heard port directors from both Long Beach and LA, if you're going to get green, you got to grow. And that's how you make those investments work. And so we're doing it anyway. We're doing a lot now, but by allowing us to grow, we can even do more if indeed LA Long Beach is open for growth.
And this will be our last question.
Hi, good evening. Brenda Martin, I'm with a terminal operator here at the Port of Long Beach. My question is either for Dan or Patty. What do you think of your current customer base for shippers, the percentage that is looking to move elsewhere, not to ship with the Long Beach or LA ports?
I don't know if we have a percentage that's moving. I would say that most of the distribution centers and the trucking companies, their businesses are off by 30% right now. So it's very, very significant amount of cargo that we're down. Is it just the economy? Is it freight that's moved elsewhere? Is it a combination? It's probably a combination of both right now.
And I'll go for that a little bit, is the problem you have is the economy is down. It's not all problem with fees and everything else. The economy is hurting. There is cargo not being shipped. In China, they're not importing as much they're down 30% in raw materials in China because they're not making things because it's not being ordered here. So a lot of the down is not just from problems that we're seeing in the ports. The economy is hurting. But at a time when the economy is hurting, people are looking for the best alternatives. They're looking to the bottom line a lot closer. 2 years ago, the fees weren't a big a problem because they were profitable and they were moving it, and they had enough business to absorb extra fees on different situations. So I can't tell you a percentage, but everybody is looking at that bottom line. Every importer in cargo on the beyond the West Coast is looking. What's the best way? They're getting paid to look at what will save them $1.
I'd just like to add on that note as well. We have found that when fuel prices reached the record highs they did last July, it forced the import community to reassess their distribution center strategies. And they realized for a lot of these retailers, their domestic spend is significantly greater than their international spend. And they realized with fuel prices that the cost it was taking from their DCs to their stores was so significant that they needed to reassess those distribution center locations closer to the end users, not just conveniently located near the port, which had been kind of the four-quarter strategy that existed for decades in this industry. As a result of doing that, we've also got to acknowledge that about 80% of the U.S. consumer population is east of the Mississippi River. And it offers many other alternatives besides this particular gateway to serve that particular area. And it is definitely changing the flow of goods, but it's going to be very difficult for the industry to measure this because there's too many moving parts in the variables that are involved here. The economic downturn coupled with shifting alternative gateways. And we're really not going to have a clear picture of that until, unfortunately, after some of that damage is done. But during the past 7 years, there has not been many new terminal developments that have taken place in LA or Long Beach as we've been going through, year-long EIR studies. While that's happened, other ports around the country have continued to grow and build the infrastructure, the ports facilities, and I think the thing that we've got to look at here for this gateway is as we start to see the recovery in the economy and cargo volumes begin to pick up, it's not back to business as usual. There's a lot more ports competing for that same cargo base. And a replacement for this gateway, based on the size of this market here alone, that's not really what we're talking about. But there's many other ports that are looking at any of the incremental growth that could have or should have gone through this gateway to absolutely accommodate that elsewhere. And that's the piece that collectively we've got to fight to keep in our own backyards here.
And those ports are having the other discussions. They're having the same discussion we're having, but in reverse. How do we take more cargo from them? I mean, they're having the same dialogue, but in reverse. And so I think, just because we build it, they're not coming anymore. I mean, Dr. Nats was quoted a couple weeks ago at a hearing, just flat out, just because we build it doesn't mean they're coming. We will compete for cargo. In the next decade ahead, it's going to be about competition. And it's not, on the technology side of life, there's things we need to do to optimize. Gate hours for the trucking industry, the 7 a.m. gate times that we like, the 12 o'clock, picking up 2 extra hours a day. There's a lot of some other issues on the table where we need to optimize what we're doing. It's not always having to spend the highest dollar to build the newest mousetrap. We need to look at operational efficiency for our harbor and flexibility and work together. So the other ports are having these same discussions. How can we take the cargo from them?
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We sincerely appreciate your willingness to share your insight with the audience, and please join me in thanking our panelists. Since I was asked to keep us on schedule, not all of the questions were asked. What we will agree to do, as Marianne indicated in her opening remarks, that we will provide answers to those questions on our website. As the panelists return to their seats, let me take this opportunity to introduce Dominic Moretti. Dominic has been instrumental in not only the town halls, but in getting us on track with CITT. So I'm delighted to introduce him and have him share his closing remarks. Dominic.
Thank you very much, Joe. In fact, I'd like to thank Dr. Magadino for doing a wonderful job as our panel moderator this evening. It's a hell of a job to step in to Richard's shoes, but he did an excellent job. Let's give him a big hand. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening's 10th annual Town Hall meeting marks a milestone in the development of a series of neutral educational forums, all designed to present and discuss relevant issues affecting the goods movement industry. It was Dave Kelly's masterfully crafted video shown earlier that reminded us of previous Town Hall topics. Our Town Hall topic this evening, the decade ahead, jobs, cargo, competition, and you, raise a number of challenging questions and concerns. What motivates supply chain decision makers to seek an alternate port of entry for their discretionary cargo normally headed for our shores? Will the ports of San Pedro Bay continue to be the gateway to Pacific Rim trade, and when can we expect job activity to increase in our local ports? Paul Bingham's presentation on recent trends in international trade and insightful answers by our panelists has helped us better understand our present global economic crisis in competition from other ports. The first town hall meeting was started in the face of considerable skepticism. It was said the CITT would never be able to present an ILW town hall meeting that was purely educational, orderly, and well attended. Fortunately, they were wrong. Over the past decade, the Town Hall series has been well received, well attended, and has received praise and awards from many sectors. Without a doubt, the Town Hall venue has been unique, creative, and trend-setting. It created a neutral educational forum bringing together all industry stakeholders in a spirit of engagement, cooperation, and consensus, seeking solutions to goods movement problems. The town halls helped create a broader understanding and respect for individual stakeholder needs and eliminated finger-pointing. It's not always the other guy's fault. Award-winning videos were created setting the stage for each town hall meeting, and numerous white papers were written providing an overview and analysis of most events. Involvement with the U.S. Department of Transportation and Caltrans has generated an ongoing effort to both expand and improve goods movement research and development. Above all else, the hallmark of our decade of town hall meetings has been the community and industry outreach of two universities centers, CITT at California State University, Long Beach, and Metrans at USC. Both are committed to education, community involvement, and goods movement research. A decade of town hall events didn't just happen with the snap of a finger. Putting together such a program was a formidable undertaking and required the skill, hard work, and dedication of many individuals and organizations. It is my pleasure to acknowledge and honor such efforts. CITT's Executive Director Marianne Vineras and Metrans, under the leadership of Jen Giuliano, both guided by their policy and steering committees, have been the driving force behind the success of this decade-old program. California State University, Long Beach, along with its University College and Extension Services, must be commended for its own ongoing commitment to industry and community outreach. Their unwavering support of the town hall meetings provided an academic atmosphere that has facilitated greater trust and cooperation among labor, industry, and community. The CITT and Metrans partnership has literally brought the university to the docks and the docks to the university. Without a doubt, a unique and monumental achievement. Let's not forget the administrative staff working hard behind the scenes, ensuring that all programs ran smoothly. Vicki Valentine at USC and Alex Traver at Cal State University, Long Beach, and support staff all earn A's for their tireless efforts. Monetary contributions, large and small, woven together, have created the economic fabric from which a decade-old tapestry of events has been crafted. As town hall meetings have been staged free of charge, all town hall meetings have been staged free of charge, thanks to the United States Department of Transportation and Caltrans funding channeled through the MetTrans Transportation Center. We thank all entities and organizations who have contributed to the financial success of town halls. See your program for a complete list of town hall supporters and sponsors and acknowledge their efforts. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the ILWU, Locals 1363 and 94, for their overall support and participation in the town hall events. It was the union, they were the first of the stakeholder groups to join hands with the CITT and MetTrans in an effort to bring about greater industry understanding and cooperation in dealing with goods movement issues that affect us all. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for a decade of individual and collective support in ILWU outreach. Over the years, Richard Hollingsworth served as the panel moderator for our town hall meetings. As Jen said earlier, Richard passed away last year. I must say that Richard was the orderly and cohesive nature of each conference was based on Richard's early involvement with program speakers and panelists, apprising them of each event's objectives and goals. Richard's personal contact was the glue that held our conferences together and laid the foundation for orderly meetings. As panel moderator, he was superb. His demeanor was concise, systematic, yet polite. He successfully navigated us through the uncharted waters of our first town hall meeting and provided insightful direction and smooth sailing for successful events. He will be sadly missed. The ILWU acknowledges the invaluable role Richard played in ensuring the town halls and were creating a neutral forum and one that was free of controversy. In appreciation, the 3 Longshore locals will be honored to make a contribution to the Richard Hollingsworth Memorial Scholarship Fund. But after all is said and done, those individuals who have been most responsible for the success of our town hall meetings have been its attendees, our audiences, each and every one of you. Surely each of you understands what a powerful tool education is. Education gives us the ability to highlight specific industry problems, as we have done this evening, and ultimately choose the best problem-solving approach. This evening's program celebrates a decade of town hall meetings and brings CITT's flagship series to a close. No, this will not mark the end of university outreach and industry involvement. Stay tuned for further announcements and initiatives that will continue to educate and inform audiences. More than ever before, and especially in these very uncertain and troubling economic times, all of us in the goods movement industry needs to keep the town hall philosophy alive, which is continuous education, engagement, cooperation, and consensus among our members and the community at large. Now is the time for all of us to collectively marshal forces and develop strategies to keep the ports of San Pedro Bay competitive and the choice port for all Pacific Rim cargo. Thank you for helping us celebrate the close of our 10th annual town hall meeting, a milestone of industry and community outreach and communication. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, I'd like the recipients of some plaques that we're going to present to please come up on the stage, and I would ask all of you to remain seated. These individuals are going to be honored for the contributions that they have made. The ILWU is pleased to have been a part of the Town Hall series and appreciates the outreach by numerous individuals and organizations who have involved the union in educational programs along with stakeholder engagement and collaboration. Longshore wishes to honor 5 organizations and select individuals for their labor outreach and union involvement. I have the distinct pleasure of conferring these honors on behalf of ILWU Locals 13, 63, and 94, along with the presentation of plaques. Will Marianne Vinieris and Jen Giuliano please step up to the podium? Marianne is the Executive Director. You all know Marianne is the Executive Director of the CITT. She was the first to engage the union, along with other stakeholders, in community and neutral forums and discussions in an effort to facilitate goods movement while at the same time maintaining neighborhood quality of life. Jen is the director of the Metrans Transportation Center at USC. She was instrumental in helping establish a National Transportation Research Center at USC. Metrans was the outgrowth of that effort. The Metrans CITT partnership, administered by Jen and Marianne, has as its mission solving transportation problems of large metropolitan areas through research, education, and outreach. Thank you, ladies, for your tireless efforts. Jen. I'm going to ask Jen to remain standing over by me, please, if you will, while I call up Larry Orcutt, please. Jen will be accepting a plaque on behalf of the U.S. Department of Transportation. Larry is Director of Research and Innovation for Caltrans. He will be accepting for that organization. Congratulations for you both, and your plaques are here. Incidentally, the funds that have come from the United States Department of Transportation and also Caltrans have provided cost-free town hall events, fostered transportation-related research, and supported goods movement educational programs. Thank you both on behalf of the ILWU. Thank you. I'd like to call up Dr. Josie. Dr. Josie will be accepting a plaque on behalf of Dr. Alexander, President, California State University, Long Beach. Dean Josie, the ILWU also congratulates the University College and Extension Services for supporting a decade of town hall events. Please extend ILWU thanks to the university in general for its collective role in labor and community outreach, and for playing such an integral role in helping to facilitate goods movement in our twin ports. It's always a pleasure for the union to come back to the beach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll turn the microphone over to Marianne, and we'll let her close this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic, very much, and thank you to the ILWU for those beautiful plaques. I very, very much appreciate. I can see that people are very eager to leave this room, get to your car, go on the road. So I am going to join Dominic in what he just said a moment ago in thanking the folks that helped to put this event together. Before that, I would like to say that it has been an honor to serve as a chair for those town hall meetings, for 10 town hall meetings. And I do appreciate and I'm grateful to the university for having had the opportunity to serve as a chair. It has been an incredible experience, an incredible learning experience. We like to talk about learning at the university, do we? So I ask those of you who are left and have not collected the t-shirts, fill out the forms, share your comments, they're very important to us. A big thank you to my staff. I would not know what to do it. They have been incredible. Specifically, Alex Traver, who is the event coordinator, did a terrific job. Tom O'Brien, he did a great job. And I see a person, you continue and applaud him. Tom O'Brien was responsible for the insert, pulling together the information on the previous town halls. Diane Delaterre, whom you saw up here with the plaques. Angeli Logan, Robin Sears was here giving time signals. Numerous volunteers, some of them are mentioned in the form. in the program. Again, thank you to USDOT, to Caltrans for the support. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to the Trade Association for their endorsement and for their trust. And thank you again to our panelists. I think they're still here. Alan, sorry we forgot you the first round. Good to have you here. To Joe Macadino, it is a terrible job. You don't know how it is. Thank you again for recognizing Richard so well. And good night.